This film is about children at play, and how in play children reveal their feelings about their parents. The children you will see were staying at this hospital with their mothers. Adults suffering from severe neurosis come here for treatment by psychotherapy. If they are mothers, they are encouraged to bring their young children to stay with them. This avoids the harmful effects of separation for both mother and child. When, as here, a mother arrives for a stay of several months, the links with home will not be broken. Father will visit as often as possible, and mother and child go home at weekends. You will see children, but no actual mothers in the film. This, however, could be a mother being admitted with her children. She is met by the nurse who will look after their daily life in the hospital. The mother learns that except during her treatment sessions with her doctor, she will live with and look after her children very much as she does at home. In the project on which this film is based, the mothers of the children you will see formed a therapeutic group under a psychiatrist. They met for an hour and a half, 4 times a week, over a period of 10 months. When the mothers went to their treatment, the children went to a play group under the supervision of a psychologist and 2 nurses. All the rest of the day, the children were cared for by their mothers. Here are the children in their playroom. You will not see the mothers. They are in their treatment session with the psychiatrist. Teamwork between the psychiatrist, psychologist, and cameraman, also a psychologist, enabled us to study what difficulties, if any, these children suffered because of their mother's illness. In the treatment of the mother, we learned about her attitude towards her children and how her type of emotional disturbance led to a particular kind of handling of her children. The film shows the consequences of this with the children in the playgroup. Now we will show you what happened to our group of children playing together. This is their first day in the playroom, and the mothers are at their first treatment session. The children are clustering round the adults. Some of them can't settle down and wander about crying. They are distressed to find themselves separated from their mothers and with strangers in a strange place. The film will follow the story of 2 individual children. This little boy, Jeremy, is particularly upset. His mother says he's cried from birth so that she hasn't had a night's sleep for 2 years. She had sought treatment for him previously, Jeremy having been considered the patient, until eventually, but grudgingly, she accepted treatment here for herself. This boy, David, doesn't know what to do with himself. He stands about passively. He looks cowed and depressed. Some of the children soon learn to occupy themselves and begin to enjoy the play group, while others take a long time to settle down. For example, this little girl, she stands around sucking her thumb and clutching a woolen comforter that she calls her cuddly. She's adopted by Helen, an older girl, who takes her on as her baby and allays her own anxiety by looking after this neglected child. This satisfies the needs of both children, and they settle down in a mother and child relationship. Which turns out not too happily for the younger child. Helen won't let this baby of hers play actively. She likes to cuddle and control her. You can see how unhappy Baby is about this. Baby is tolerated by Mother only so long as she does what Mother wants. This is David again, unable to play. He is so inhibited that he spends most of his time just watching the others. Sometimes he finds something to do, generally nothing more structured than desultory hitting and banging. In her treatment, his mother complained that this behavior was provocative and enraged her so that she often beat him. It seems she couldn't allow him any spontaneity. She could tolerate him only when he conformed to her standards of good behavior. If he didn't, she invariably flew into rages at him. He is very easily bullied by this older boy. He can't defend himself or run away. Sometimes he tries to buy approval by bullying Jeremy, as he's been bullied himself. But even this doesn't make him popular. Here he is, on the edge of a game. He's rejected by this rather aggressive little girl, and goes back to his banging. Jeremy, too, is thoroughly miserable. His mother says he demands her complete attention, particularly when she lapses into daydreams. Even at night, when she tries to disentangle herself, he holds on grimly and tugs her hair. His hair-pulling makes him feared by the other children. After 4 or 5 weeks, the group of children are organizing their own games very happily. Here they've built their own house and are furnishing and decorating it. Everybody joins in, except David and Jeremy. They're excluded by the others. This physical barrier is a real social barrier. They are literally shut out. Curiously enough, in the mothers' group, the mothers of these 2 children sit apart as social isolates. 2 months after admission, this is the situation. These 2 are isolated, depressed, passing their time listlessly and without much enjoyment. Helen is having difficulty with her baby. She's growing up rapidly and resents being restricted. Her appearance has changed a lot in 2 months. She looks more grown up now and isn't dependent on Helen anymore in the playroom. But Helen is still dependent on her. When she runs away, Helen finds another small child for her pram, while the ex-baby enjoys herself with 2 older children. Helen's second victim escapes, and thoroughly depressed, Helen climbs into the pram herself. Now we're going to tell the individual story of Jeremy, the 2-year-old boy who has cried since birth. On this date, the group returned after 3 weeks' absence due to measles. Most of the children take up playing where they left off, but Jeremy repeats the distress of his early days of admission. He cried continuously throughout this session. He was more distressed than we'd ever seen him. He didn't approach the adults, but went to Helen. She wanted to hand him over to us, saying that she thought he needed looking after. Mrs. Wren asked Helen if she would like to look after Jeremy. And she said, "Well, I've told him his mummy will come, but he's just a little boy. He doesn't understand." Here is her former baby, quite grown up now and completely emancipated from her. Helen's motherly concern for Jeremy covers a desire to get away from him. David's little sister is attending the playgroup for the first time. She's 20 months old. David wants us to know he loves his little sister. This quite upsets Jeremy. He takes out his handkerchief not only to wipe his eyes but also to hide himself in. And the smell is also very important. This handkerchief belongs to his mother and is a link with her. Helen asked Mrs. Wren to play the piano for her. Helen's habit is to ask us to start some activity, and then when it gets going, she takes over. Asked, "Are you going to look after Jeremy?" she said, "Well, I must wash my hands first." David and his little sister have their own exclusive space. He is unsure of his acceptance by the other children. Now she's washing her hands, but instead of taking over Jeremy, she ignores him and returns to the piano. He follows hopefully. Helen takes her place at the piano, still followed by Jeremy. She can't stand the noise he's making. Her concern for Jeremy is not very sincere. Now she has gone off to her own game of painting, and she paints as if he wasn't there at all. She definitely doesn't want him. She stops talking about him. This is despair for Jeremy. He attempts to shut out this unfriendly world with his mother's handkerchief. Then he looks towards the door where his mother left. He is waiting for her to come back. Jeremy's mother had come back this day to tell the psychiatrist that she and the child were so much improved that she wanted to stop treatment. She had never felt herself a patient like the others. But while she's describing this in her treatment session, Jeremy is demonstrating how untrue it is in the playroom. She's come back for one day only. She hasn't brought any of his toys, and he feels completely let down. The only thing he has to cling to is his handkerchief. We make several overtures to him, but he doesn't want us. His speech is indistinct, and we can't understand anything he attempts to say. Jeremy's young, immature mother found his demands for attention exhausting. They revived her own childhood dependence, which she could not tolerate in herself, and deprived her of any pleasure in mothering her child. Eventually, he responds to an approach. He is offered some clay to play with and a toy motor car, because his favorite toy is a little motor car of his own. But he doesn't want these toys because they are not his. When his mother collected him, and by this time she'd decided not to leave, we asked her to bring some of his toys. Here he is with his own car. These are not random movements. It was apparent that the point of the game is to steer the car round the edge of the chair. The car goes round the edge and it's dangerous. And he said something to the effect that if man goes over the edge, man dies. His father drives a van, and the game seems to be concerned with keeping his father safe. Because Mrs. Wren understood that this was a dangerous game and was able to trace out the course of the car round the edge, he gained enough confidence to go on playing. On the following day, he made a link with a toy watch his mother gave him. With these 3 toys, he seems to represent his family: the van, the car, and the watch. He asked to see Mrs. Wren's watch and then put his watch on, and through this made a link with his absent mother. He depends on Mrs. Wren's companionship and interest in this, and when she's called away, he's very anxious. As is normal with a child of 2 years, he has to have a reliable adult around, and he has to feel she takes an interest. Sometimes he varies his playthings. Today he's brought a gun instead of a watch. He has to have his own secure, private playing space on these 2 chairs. David, meanwhile, has been playing a game on his own. He comes along and steals Jeremy's gun, breaking in on Jeremy's private world. The next stage of the game is painting and washing the toys. You can see from his attitude that he's now enjoying these games. He still insists that Mrs. Wren joins in. He wants her to paint and takes her by the hand to show her how to paint. Now he's looking for more playthings. He's a little more adventurous, more confident. He's gone to fetch a bit of clay. He puts the clay beside the handkerchief. Reassured by a link with his mother, he now feels able to make use of the clay and other playthings to express his feelings. Finally, he has laid out the playthings. At long last, he seems to have mastered his anxiety with the help of an adult by making use of these particular toys which represent himself and his family. Jeremy's play is now much freer and he obviously enjoys himself. In her treatment, his mother is slowly becoming aware of her own dependence, which she could not tolerate, either in herself or in her son. She has less need to daydream and is more relaxed with Jeremy. He is delighted with this noddy book, in which he has discovered a picture of a van just like his father's van. He adopts this framework, which he calls his daddy van. It becomes his favorite plaything. He now wants to join in the other children's games, venturing away from his private corner, but he must have his van with him, even when he's painting. That's essential. Here comes David. He's got a favorite toy also, this seesaw, which he uses as a weapon against Jeremy. He is attacking him in a rather calm way, with no great show of temper. He's really attacking him to attract attention, because Jeremy has been having a lot of individual attention. David is quite lethargic in this attack. By going over to the piano and sitting on the keyboard, he's making an appeal of some kind. David speaks very fluently and distinctly, but he very rarely talks at all, and never about anything that's important to him emotionally. Asked, "What would you like, David?" he doesn't answer. When Mrs. Wren is playing, he bangs with his bottom on the keyboard, which may be joining in or some kind of attack. We already know from his mother that his only method of appeal is provocation. At home, he annoys her by turning on the radiogram very loudly. Now we go back to that day when they returned after 3 weeks' absence and followed David's story. This was the beginning of Jeremy's, which we have just seen. David has a little sister of whom he is very fond, and he mustn't show any hatred or envy of her. When she comes to the playroom, he takes great care of her, arranges a special place for her to sit, collects toys for her, and no one else is allowed to have anything. This little girl wants a toy, but he won't give anything away. He's not allowed to be greedy for himself, but he can be greedy for his little sister. His mother has trained him to be extremely well behaved, and this means inhibiting any sign of his natural jealousy. In her treatment, his mother was very jealous of the other mothers and tried to gain the exclusive attention of the psychiatrist. She was an only child who monopolized her father jealously. David takes his sister back to this enclosure which he has made for both of them, and this sequence shows you what he feels about her, both sides of it. Offered some play material, he doesn't use it very well. He's imitating another child's game. As usual, he shows very little initiative. Clay seems to mean more to him. He takes it and asks for a dinner plate. He divides the clay into 2 portions, giving Sally the smaller. We're beginning to see that much of his inhibition is concerned with jealousy of Sally. Here he has arranged a seesaw game. He tells the nurse to look after Sally. He says, "Hold on tight, Sally," looking very insincere about it. Here, as usual, he's a spectator, but Sally soon learned to play on her own. She has much more independence and initiative than her elder brother, because the mother's relationship with Sally is relatively conflict-free. She enjoys painting. This is her first painting. David has not been able to paint, and starts this game of breaking up her water dish, a very violent game. It's only safe for him to play it so close to Sally, because there is someone there between them. He's standing on the seesaw, which he habitually carries around with him, as Jeremy does his daddy van. He asks for paint and starts painting messily. His aim, apparently, is the destruction of Sally's painting. He smears over his paper, then hers. He's ruined her painting. As he gets more active, he becomes more excited, and it was at this point that he broke off the game and stole Jeremy's gun. He seems to envy Jeremy for his good relationship with Mrs. Wren. Every game he enjoyed ended in an outburst of aggression. After the messing comes the washing, the usual sequence. He also enjoys washing as a form of attack, throwing water around the floor. The advantage of the playgroup to him is that when he does something like this, the others can join in and make a game of it, and this helps him to get some acceptance from the other children. Gradually, he becomes integrated as a member of the group, instead of someone excluded for having done something naughty. They all like messes, because they all like cleaning up too. It's great fun. this is a day when some of them didn't feel so good. They're all huddled on the floor. The little girl in the foreground is very fond of playing with water, and her mother objects to her playing with water. And on this day, she brought the child in and she said, "Now don't get wet," and hit her a heavy blow in the face in front of all of us. And the child went off into a temper tantrum. She isn't so much depressed here as very, very angry, screaming with rage and waiting for her mother. She's carried away from the door because she's lying with her head just by it, but she insists on crawling all the way back several times. Now David is impressed by this fit of rage because his mother also hits him at times. David's mother, afraid of her own hostile feelings, can't allow him to show anger or even normal self-assertiveness. He can't fly into a rage himself, but he mimics the other child's attitude as if to say, "This happens to me too." He's also got hold of Jeremy's bus, emphasizing that he too needs some special attention, as Jeremy had. Jeremy is a bit jealous. Now David has gone right up to the little girl to emphasize the similarity of their problems. We want to get her to play, but she won't have anything to do with us. She just wants to go on fighting. Jeremy, very amusingly, offers us all chocolate cigarettes to relieve the tension. He feels sorry for David, although he took his bus. She's kicking less vigorously now and seems ready to be won over. After some time, the nurse gets her interested. She sits up, takes notice, and begins to draw. Meanwhile, David gets Mrs. Wren into this enclosure and shuts her up for himself. Helen and the older boy now attend the local school and always come in to say hello and cause a bit of trouble. That made Jeremy cry. Now we have the two children who used to be excluded inside the framework. David is a slow-moving child, slow to change, and very repetitive and monotonous in his activities. And on the following day, he repeats this behavior. Once again, he doesn't say anything or ask for anything. Asked if he would like a garage for his bus, he now says, "Yes, please," in a quiet, polite voice. He shows very little initiative or energy in his play and carries on monotonously like this for a very long time. He demands that you have the tolerance to live with him at his pace. Once again there is washing. This seems to be the second stage of many of these games, in which there is a striving to make good for destructive fantasies. The material has to be washed. The game is absorbingly interesting to him. When he has washed this old box thoroughly and to his satisfaction, he then washes the piano. He's talking to Mrs. Wren. He says, "You mustn't make this piano dirty again." He's very cross with her and blames her for the damage that was done to the piano as a result of his behavior. In his play, he needs a companion whom he can blame and whom he's entitled to punish. Then he can feel satisfaction in being the person who puts things right. He played that sort of game over and over again, after which there was quite a change in him. He was much more relaxed and active, and he talked more. He talked quite freely. Here he is seesawing with Sally. He is now accepted by the other children and allowed to join in their group games. This is a game the girls invented. It's a parody of their mother's behavior in the evening. It's called bedtime drinks. Most of the mothers have some favorite drink they take at bedtime. The children made a bed of 2 chairs and dispensed bedtime drinks to each other. David is in this group, but on the outskirts. Now he makes a gesture with a tambourine that is typical, a very guarded, furtive gesture. It usually means trouble is coming. When you get to know David, you recognize these signals as an appeal for protection and control. He finished the game by throwing water over his 2 companions. He completely soaked them. Mrs. Wren asked why he did this. Because they were naughty. Weren't you naughty? No, they were naughty. He is now using other children in the role he first gave her. This is a game of clowns. It shows how he is accepted by the other children and is actually learning to enjoy himself. His mother, who by now is beginning to feel proud of him and can tolerate him better, she is even learning to play with him. He tries the seesaw game again. He has to bring it near an adult. Actually, he does hurt Sally. She falls off. But she insists on going back again. She always cooperates in these semi-dangerous games of his. She falls off a second time, and her place is taken by a more tomboyish little girl. Here he is being encouraged to play a shopkeeper game because he has difficulty in sharing things, in giving and taking. He has taken over the role of shopkeeper. Notice how he holds his right arm as if paralyzed. This is his usual indication of inhibited aggression. This customer he is serving is the child who tried to get a toy from him in an earlier sequence. Then he wouldn't give her anything. His attitude to music has changed. He likes to join in now. He's there at the end of the keyboard. And he's relaxed enough even to run about, sing and dance, which would have been impossible 2 months ago. Another group painting game. Jeremy used so much water that the painting turned into a washing game. This always exhilarates the children, particularly David. He helps to wash the table and wants to climb up onto it. Notice how clumsy his movements are, in spite of his physical strength and muscular development. When he's up on the table, he feels so delighted that he actually achieves a rather graceful ballet-like gesture of sheer enjoyment. But as usual with David, when he begins to enjoy himself, he gets more excited, and as he gets more excited, he gets more dangerous. He painted the window so that nobody can see in, hinting that something dangerous is going to happen. Then he told Mrs. Wren, actually in words, the first time he had done that, "I'm going to break the light, I'm going to smash the window, I'm going to smash everything." He is now aware of his dangerous violence, but wants to hand over the responsibility for looking after him, the room, and the other children. As they finished the washing game in a high state of hilarity, we have to supply another game. This begins quietly enough, and as usual, as David begins to enjoy himself, he gets more and more hilarious, and then becomes slightly aggressive. He begins to attack. He never attacks his little sister, and fortunately these two little girls, his favorite companions, are quite a good match for him. We didn't notice the rolling pin on the table, and when he threw it and hit Peter, it could have been serious. Fortunately, it wasn't. But that was the end of the game. After Peter had been pacified, there was David. He understands the rule is that you mustn't hurt anyone, and if you do, you're taken out of the playroom, but with an adult. At first, he thinks it's a joke, but when taken over the threshold, he cries and becomes desperate. By this time, it was warm enough to play in the garden, and as the children go out, we can think about their mothers. David's mother had been a demanding only child who clung jealously to her father. In bringing up David, she tried to suppress any resemblance to her own childhood behavior. It resulted in an inhibited, over-controlled boy who was provocative and at times gave way to temper tantrums. Only in her treatment, when she began to recognize and tolerate these traits in herself, did she tolerate David's natural self-assertiveness. Jeremy's mother could not accept herself as a patient, and said only that Jeremy was lost and distressed, but there was nothing wrong with the child except the mother's unhappiness. When she accepted herself as a patient, she began to see how she had tried to flee into daydreams because of her own dependence when faced with being a wife and mother. With a more relaxed and tolerant attitude, he ceased to be so demanding, and by now she can get positive pleasure from mothering him. He even developed into quite an adventurous, independent child who liked to organize little expeditions with the others. The climbing frame shows another difference between these two children and the others. The others use it quite freely, climbing, swinging and jumping. But Jeremy and David are too timid for this. David has his own idea of what to do. He constructs his own apparatus saying, "Make a bed, make a big bed for all the children." He experiments timidly by walking along a plank laid on the ground. This is about Jeremy's level too. David next sees the framework as a cage and says, "I'm a lion. I'm a very tired lion." He seems in such ways to express his awareness of being dangerous and how much fatigue he experiences from constantly restraining his aggression. The two little girls call out, "Lion, lion, come and frighten us." They seem to accept David's idea of himself. His aggression is released and used as a basis of a mutually enjoyable game. This is their last play session. The mother's treatment is over and they are going home tomorrow. Looking back, what struck us most in both children was their difficulty in playing. We felt this was due to their mother's inability to enjoy the children. They could not tolerate in their children what was unbearable in themselves. Jeremy is no longer tearful and whining. How much this is due to the playgroup and how much to the mother's treatment we can't say. David has turned into a cheerful, energetic, lively child. He's come a long way since we first saw him, and we hope he will continue to develop and surmount, with his mother's help, any future difficulties. Sometimes he plays rough. In play, a child works over and over the things he feels about himself and his parents. He often appeals to an understanding companion for help. This, together with the understanding gained by a mother in treatment, may help her to enjoy bringing up her child to grow up freely in the years to come.